Hi, I'm Paul Verschoor, and together with my colleague Andreas Roepstorff, we are speaking with Professor Theo Mulder about the challenges that large-scale scientific organizations face in building and sustaining collaboration. Trained as an experimental neuropsychologist, Theo was a professor at Radboud University before serving 2 terms as the scientific director of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences in Amsterdam, after which he became the director of the Netherlands Institute for the Advancement of Science. He also initiated and organized the Interdisciplinary Consortium for Clinical Movement Sciences and Technology, which links a large number of clinical and academic partners in the research of movement disorder. Theo, welcome to our podcast interview. It's great that you could join us. And maybe we could start by you just describing a little bit your trajectory that brought you to where you are now and the different main steps in between. In terms of your professional career and your experience with the important topic of collaboration.
Okay, so my name is Theo Mulder. I'm trained as an experimental neuropsychologist in Nijmegen. And in 1994, I became professor of movement disorders in Nijmegen. And I was that until 1999 and then went to Groningen to become head of the Department of Human Movement Sciences and professor of Human Movement Sciences. And then in 1999, a remarkable career switch took place when I became the overall director of the 19 institutes in the Netherlands of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Sciences. And so became the scientific director of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Sciences. And that I did, which was a rather grim job on the edge of politics and science. And that I did 10 years. That's the no longer is justified. And after that, I was 1 year director of the NIAS, the Netherlands Institute for the Advancement of Sciences. And then I thought, this is the end of the career. And then I gave a lecture in Nijmegen and criticized the Radboud University Hospital, the St. Maartens Clinic, and the Technical University in Twente, that they did not cooperate enough on the domain of human movement disorders, because they were all specialized in it. But there was not enough cooperation in a world who was organizing itself in larger consortia. And I thought under the umbrella of the Royal Academy, I thought it made sense to say that, and I will never hear anything about it. Mm-hmm. Will not hear anything about it. But that was not the case. The boards phoned me and said, well, you have a point. And then a new aspect, instead of going with my, in Dutch is termed pensioen, a new part of a career started as head of a large scientific cooperation between 5 partners.
And that's you're still in that collaborative process.
Yes, I gave that lecture in the City Theater in Nijmegen, and that was in 2017, I think. And then they invited me to create a consortium of about 200 FTE, 200 full positions in science between the 5 partners. And we organized that, and it was termed ICMS, Interdisciplinary Consortium for Clinical Movement Sciences and Technology. And I'm still, until this day, until July the 1st, I was the chair of the board. But now, happily, another one is taking over it.
Okay, congratulations. But look, so if you look now at these jumps you made into managing these complex processes of collaboration or cooperation, as you call them, but what are for you the defining features of collaboration? What makes collaboration in this context? What does it mean?
Yes, it's a simple question, but it requires, as always, a difficult answer, because there are many aspects of cooperation. The first one is that you saw a change in science policy in the Netherlands and also science policy in Europe. instead of that single persons who were brilliant could apply for money, it became a sort of policy that larger consortia were formed for applying for much more money. Of course, incorporating the brilliant individuals. So, if you would like to play a role in Europe, you should reorganize yourself from individuals into consortia. And so one part of cooperation is that it was a political necessity to do that. And the other part is that, of course, if you create an interdisciplinary group, you are scientific, much powerful. You have many more viewpoints than if you work on your own in a so-called social scientific island.
Yeah, but Theo, that might be the objective, to construct large consortia. But what would make such a consortium collaborative? What are the defining features?
Trust. The only thing I think that if in Dutch somebody say it like this: als je uit je bek stinkt, wil niemand met je samenwerken. That is not translatable.
Oh, it's not.
But that means that if there is a group of people who have joint interests and trust each other and are able to share and are willing to share, that is the seed of cooperation. It's a human affair. Mm-hmm. So there is a political pressure, but it will not work without trust and the capability or the willingness to share.
Right.
In the Groningen University Hospital, there was a large shield in the hall, and there's that if you cannot share, you cannot multiply. And that's true.
That's right. But then let's jump to the period you were running the institutes at the Royal Academy, which are a dozen or so. With
17 at this
17,
moment.
right? So,
that's a mess.
Okay. And that we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of researchers. So how do you see collaboration? How well did collaboration come off the ground in that context?
That was a totally different context for example, ICMS is, because the institutes of the Royal Academy are in the domain of biology, in the domain of neuroscience, in the domain of the humanities. So within the humanities, there is cooperation, and I stimulated that cooperation very strongly. Within the biology also, within the neuroscience also, but between the humanities and the neuroscience, there was none cooperation. But actually, there were three pillars.
Okay, but how did you engineer that? So how did you detect it? How do you measure that? And then also, how did you try to improve the collaboration within and between these institutes?
Yeah, let's take as an example the institutes of the humanities. The Institute of the Humanities are quite well known, but they are small, and the impetus for the cooperation was that if you unite these seven institutes of the humanities into a Royal Academy Humanities Institute, they became also related to content. They became much more powerful and were a much larger power compared to the much larger institutes in the neuroscience and the biology domain. Mm-hmm. But that was not an easy process. That was absolutely not an easy process, because not everybody was convinced that working together and joining together would create only positive aspects. Splendid isolation is a lovable concept.
But that sounds more that you try to sort of stabilize an existing situation without having real control over then improving the collaborative process within or between these institutions. Or did I misunderstand?
Partly that is true, but there was one main aspect. we managed to create to get a substantial amount of money to stimulate the institutes to work together and to open new research lines. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it was protecting the institutes as they were, but in the other way, it was also meant as a facilitator for a more internal cooperation than existed before.
Okay, but that would mean there was a big incentive. There was a big incentive for members of such an institute to then collaborate because more money would be made available to them.
Yeah, and more possibilities to create larger research programs, for example, long-term research.
Andrea?
Yeah, Theo, I was very interested by your 3 points: the joint interest, the trust, and the willingness to share. Would you mind repeating the Dutch phrase again? I'm just trying to unpack that one.
And the Dutch phrase was, and I can translate it, als je uit je bek stinkt, dan wil ik niet met je samenwerken. And that means if you smell ugly, I will not cooperate with you. And that's a sort of, that was meant as a metaphor that you would like to work together, that there is some mutual trust and even sympathy. And if that's not the case, then it's a top-down process to work together, and that never works, almost never works. So cooperation should grow bottom up.
To follow up on that one, because of the willingness to share, what can be shared in these processes in the scientific community? What is it that people are sharing? Because it doesn't seem to be only a matter of sharing economic resources. Could you tell a little bit more of what you have seen people share successfully?
You can share money, but that's not what I meant. You can share knowledge, you can share infrastructure, you can share methods, you can share databases, and if you do that, you'll become a much more interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary power, which can solve problems which nobody can in its own. So by sharing, I mean especially the non-materialistic aspects of knowledge, infrastructure, methods, data.
This is very interesting. But it's English because in English. Go ahead, Andreas. I think this point about sharing is a critically important one. Which kind of reservations or obstructions did you find for people actually sharing? Is it that they feel that they lose something when they are here, or is it an unwillingness to do it? Or what's the mechanism in that? Could you expand on that?
Noise historic. Yeah, actually, it's a very human mechanism. If you have not the idea that all will profit from it, and you are not willing to give up something where you can profit from. So if you don't, let's again use the word trust. If you don't trust the other parties in the consortium, you are not willing to open your infrastructure. You are not willing to open data sets for them. And that's what I meant. And that's what took place in ICMS. There, the researchers, the professors saw that there was a plus value in joining together and creating new mutual interdisciplinary research programs. And it's my strict opinion that if it was the dean who was on top of this process, then it would much less easier to create such a consortium.
Go for it. Would that mean that it has to be conceived of as a plus-sum game, or a zero-sum game, or a negative-sum game? Is that really what lies at the core of these collaborations? That the participants somehow imagine that this is not a zero-sum or a negative-sum game, that they are...
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If the participants are not convinced that they can profit from that sort of cooperation in receiving large grants or having a more scientific power in the university or in the scientific community, they are not easily willing to cooperate or to join that consortium. So they have to see the practical, the pragmatic, and also the scientific or theoretical advantages of it.
To follow this point, and then I'll give it back to you, Paul. You describe very different levels at which this plays itself out. There might be economic resources, it might be power within the university, or it might be the possibility to gain knowledge that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. How would you actually balance these things out against each other? Because sometimes you might lose one of these accounts but win on another one. Can you say something about what it takes to create an environment where even though some incommensurable things are in a sense being exchanged, at the same time collaboration is maintained? These kinds of damage thing is very interesting.
The word you used, environment, is a correct word. You should create an environment with people from different backgrounds who see more or less immediately the advantages of working together. And you cannot manage all these aspects. It's not possible to manage them. It's a sort of social dynamics which appear in this process. There is a board of the ICMS, but the main core of ICMS is the Council of Researchers and clinical leaders. They together form the core of the program, and they decide the trajectories to the future. And of course, you are saying you at the one side you lose something, and the other side you win something. But that's the dynamic of groups, and that's the dynamic of science in the midst of political changes.
Yeah,
and especially in the arena of Europe.
But there are two parts. Right? So ICMS is still an experiment that is running, while your experiment at the Royal Academy is finished, right? So if we now just look at that period, can you highlight a real success case and then explain why that was so successful along the lines of the model of collaboration you propose?
Let's start in the Royal Academy. I think a success case is NIN, the Netherlands Institute for Neurosciences. In 2006, the institute was in the turmoil. It received not such a positive evaluation, and there was instability in the institute, and the merger between two institutes was not well balanced, and there was mistrust. And I think I am fascinated by science. I'm not a technical board member. I have a passion for science, and by recreating that institute, also injecting money into the institute, and to hire two novel directors, and to reorganize the institute in a much more social community. I think that was a success story within the realm of the Royal Academy. Mm-hmm. And that institute, NIN, is quite successful, as Paul knows.
Absolutely. But Theo, in that case, it could sound like you say, well, you just have to pick the right people to lead. But how then about the sharing that you highlighted earlier, right? How within that context was the sharing of knowledge and infrastructure a decisive factor? Or would in that success story success hinge more around, let's say, the leaders of the process?
Yeah, it's the leaders of the process, but it's also that the leaders, together with the Royal Academy, reorganized the institute so that senior group leaders get a more decisive voice into the future and the trajectory of the institute. It was also governed in another way as before. And they managed to get the whole community within the institute behind the programs they designed themselves.
So what was the...
And again, it was not a top-down. It was not a totally top-down process. It was top-down and bottom-up.
So what are then the key features in that governance structure, that the change in governance structure that made the difference?
I think the division in group and the position of and the more powerful position of the group's leaders to redesign the future of the institute.
So it's also the engagement of a broader group of stakeholders in the process.
Yes. So absolutely.
But to contrast that, what would be an example of actually a failure in that same period, where the model didn't work?
That's also a difficult question, because you have longer to think about a correct answer to that question than to the other question.
Mm-hmm. That's why I did the easy one first, Theo. So that's
there were also institutes with a very powerful historic tradition, and who played a large role in Dutch society and were famous, historically also famous. It was very difficult to reorganize these old humanities institutes. That's a difficult case. I love the humanities, but and I really learned a lot of these institutes. For me, it's the core of our civilization, humanities. But it's also very difficult to change these institutes who are stable sometimes for a century, and to create the Royal Academy Center of Humanities. That was a hell of a job, with much negative press, and people who wrote maybe is the right place for Theo Mulder somewhere in the Dutch kennels.
Oh, really? Okay. But then could you put your finger? So on one, we have inertia, we have organizational inertia, there's tradition, right? That might go against successful collaboration in this case. But were there other features of then this Humanities Institute that made it so difficult to instill the transition?
There were parts where, in general, the general age of the researchers in the Humanities Institute was around 55. And in the Science Institutes and the Biology Institutes, it was around 32 or 33. That makes a difference. And another difference is that not all the institutes in the humanities have research traditions who fit together. They cultivate, and in a way, a scientist is conservative. Yeah. He embraces the methods he likes. He embraces the methods he is successful, and is very hesitant to change. And although you have the umbrella of humanities, not all humanities institutes are the same. They have different traditions, they have different outlooks, they have different fields of interest, and it took a lot of work to join these institutes into also a consortium, but then a consortium in the humanities. But it took place, and now it is quite successful.
But now, if we talk about this relationship between the academy and the institutes and the universities or other academic institutions, that's of course not a level in which collaboration has to be organized, possibly around the same structures that you already indicated of objectives, trust, maybe methods and concepts. I don't know, but and on the top of that, there is a form of collaboration with the state itself, who is funding the academy, but also in parallel funding through its National Research Council, these other institutes and universities. So how effective is that process? How is that project? How is that level of the process managed? What are its key features, and how can you make it successful?
That are three intermingling questions. Let's first focus on the difference of the Royal Academy Institutes and the universities. One of the characteristics of the Academy Institute is that they have the possibility to focus on very long-term research programs. Some of these programs are 10 or 15 years or longer. And that's not always, but that's more than once a difference between how the universities work. That's a difference. And the point of cooperation between the institutes and the universities actually is based on the same preconditions as I said before. There has to be a joint interest. There has to be a joint advantage, and there has to be a willingness to cooperate. And the directors of the institutes have quite a lot of influence to manage that by themselves.
Okay, but then you have the institutes, you have the academy. That's what you described now. That's the within academy collaboration between the stakeholders. But now, how do you manage the collaborative process with, for instance, the funding council? Because that also brings you closer to, let's say, a political strategic level of decision making, where other forms of interaction might drive the process.
In the realm of the academy, it's more the level of facilitation because of the powerful position of the institute directors of themselves. And ICMS was a much different process to build than the cooperation between universities and the Royal Academy Institute, because all directors of the institutes were also university professors. So that is one of the methods to create a bridge between the institutes and the universities, and that was also a method to bring in educational obligations into the institutes, although they're not obliged to do that. So by creating these roles and these professorships, you decrease the traditional tension between the institutes and the universities.
Right, but now there are also different levels of competition within the system. Like, and so also being a psychologist, you will appreciate these probable or possible collisions or trade-offs between, let's say, personal objectives like building your career, advancing your theory, validating your hypothesis, and so on, while in the meantime having to find ways to interact and collaborate with a person that has a similar kind of personal-driven or ego-driven agenda. So that this might set up a trade-off where at some point people also have to sacrifice personal goals in order to be successful in the collaboration. So do you see that collision as a process that must be actively managed and understood, or it has resolved itself automatically in the past?
The situation you are describing is a situation who takes place in larger organizations too, in the university, in larger industrial consortia, that is not specific for the Royal Academy Institute. It's in all larger social institutions. You have these sort of tensions, and if you create an atmosphere that these tensions can take place and resolve itself, then it's part of the social dynamics of groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but would you also?
And of course,
No, go ahead, Theo. Sorry.
And of course, as everywhere, there are tensions between people who work together,
mm-hmm.
And that's not abnormal. And these tensions will fade away or not. And but that takes place in every human group.
But my question is, would you manage? For instance, would you try to detect these kinds of collisions and then really actively step in? And which buttons would you then push to try to remediate? Or would you just say, look, this is in the nature of the beast. There's not much I can do about that. So just let it run its course and maybe someone will drop out of the process.
Yeah, in between, because don't forget how it works. And we talk now for about half an hour of about the Royal Academy. Although it's already five or more years ago that I ended my position as a director. But to answer your question, you have the so-called headquarters of the Royal Academy in Amsterdam, the Trippenhuis,
mm-hmm.
And then you have the institutes who are scattered around several cities in the Netherlands, most in the west. And although you can see the tensions from a distance, you can see tensions within institutes, it's extremely difficult to manage that literally from a headquarter in another city. So if you would like to manage it, it goes always via the director,
mm-hmm.
and as a support or as a but it's extremely difficult to look in detail what type of human affairs take place in institutes who are 70 kilometers from Amsterdam.
But okay, so indeed today, so we also should celebrate that today is your last day as chairman of the board of the this interdisciplinary consortium of movement science, which you essentially have built up, working with many people across different universities and clinics. So what lessons did you carry over from your time at the academy into now building this network and this complex collaborative process really from scratch?
There were a number of lessons. I think when I was Royal Academy director, I worked much more top down. And that one of the reasons was the distance between the headquarters, the Trippenhuis, the literally distance of the headquarters and the institute, and also the organization, the institutional of the institute. Lesson number one was, if you create a consortium, you should create it step by step, bottom up, and content driven. And that was one of the main lessons I learned when they asked me to improve the cooperation between the partners I mentioned, the university hospital, the technical university, the St. Maarten's clinic, between clinics and research institutes. It was slowly, but not very slowly, because it started in 2018, and now it's formally it exists and it's very successfully, but slowly building the supporting frame of the content bearers, the professors, the senior researchers, and that I think was learned. That was a lesson I learned from my history at the academy.
Yeah, but that
take more time,
right? Mm-hmm. Take more time and
take more time and involve everyone who has a role in the process, step by step or as a group, in the building of that new construction.
but it also means that you're shaping a process over time, right?
Yeah.
First, you prepare the ground, you identify, I guess, the key players with whom you then prepare the next phase, right? So how many phases have you gone through? What was the process there?
To create ICMS, it took about 4 years. And the first phase one was were the so-called grand meetings to have a probe whether one saw the importance of a more intensive cooperation between 5 partners in 2 cities. If that willingness was not there, or if there was too much hesitation, then it's sleuren aan een doodpaard. In my opinion, it's not very possible to create such a large consortium totally top down. So phase one was the willingness to cooperate. Phase two was to create the social organization to manage that. So to create groups of senior researchers, clinicians, and let them talk with each other. Phase three was, what is bottom up if you have if you have all the money you want? What are the 3 large programs you would like to work on the next 10 years? And how would you like to subdivide? That was phase 3. And phase 4 was, how would you like to fill in with content these programs? And after phase 4, in fact, the building was there, and the people were there, and now a joint grant process could start, and that's the phase we are in now, and everybody is on board and stays on board.
Right.
So it's step-like, and I learned that it is a massive advantage if you do not take only the head of departments and your senior professors as your stakeholders, but the whole community.
Right. Andreas?
Yes, thank you, Theo. Sorry, I was thrown off the network. I would like to inquire
a bit more into the temporal extension or the temporal dimension. What is the importance of the time frame you have in front of you, where it is 1 year, 3 years, 5 or 10 years? Is it like an optimal spot? Is longer always better when you're trying to get the collaboration off the ground?
No, longer is not always better. I think let's take ICMS as an example. ICMS is now a stable politically stable consortium, but it's still vulnerable. If in the next 2 years there are no large grant acquisitions, then it's not unthinkable that the senior scientists are saying, well, we have grants, but we had that grants before ICMS 2, and I don't see any advantage in it. And it's breakdown again. So a longer period is not always is not better. It is the proof of the pudding is if the members of the consortium see that the consortium has more advantage than each group or each institution at its own. And in that phase, we are now, and Paul knows that exactly because we work together at the so-called Groeifonds aanvraag. That's a major grant proposal in the Netherlands. And everybody knows that we are there because there is an ICMS. Nobody in its own could be part of that large grant. But if it's not successful, then it still has a risk. But by taking more time, you make the consortium more socially solid.
And this vulnerability, is the weakness, is it the strength, or is it?
it's the weak strength. It's no, it's of course a normal part of the scientific deal. But if you bring together more than 200 senior scientists and behind them maybe 500 junior scientists, and in 1, 2, 3 years there is no advantage of the consortium visible, then there is no future. But I'm not that pessimistic. On the contrary, I see a very much positive future for such a consortium, but only if it is based on, and then we are back at the beginning, if it is based on the willingness to cooperate, on mutual trust, and the conviction that you can answer questions which you cannot answer if you work much more monodisciplinary. And I think it's a political necessity in the science policy of Europe at this moment, that you have these public and public-private consortia, because we didn't discuss the private part, but that's as well in Europe as in the Netherlands and in other countries. You have the building up.
But Theo, I hear a little bit of possible contradiction in how you now describe the process, because we started out by saying, well, people have to see that they can gain in understanding, in methodology, shared infrastructure, what have you, all these good things. But now on the other hand, you say, yeah, but if the seniors don't see in 2 years' time that they get more money, then the whole thing will again collapse. So that seems to contradict now the goal setting, because what's then really the objective? Is the collaboration a vehicle, a means to an end, to generate more money or resource in the end for the principal investigators, right? Or is it the other way around? But so it's really the measure of success, whether you can generate more grant money, because that would then contradict the idea of common goal setting along a more intellectual and idealistic perspective.
I think these things are intermingled, but science runs on ideas and money. If you have ideas and no money, there is no science. And if you have money and no ideas, there is also no science. Such a consortium brings in new intellectual possibilities, and people like that. And I see corporations appear who were not there in this way 3 years ago. But nevertheless, if these willingness to cooperate and if these new project plans are not ending in real possibilities to work together in a scientific program, then enthusiasm could end. Although everybody sees that it has more possibilities, and also to solve the scientific, not only the scientific but also the social challenge. So I'm not pessimistic at all.
Right.
But I see the fragile aspects of such a social experiment, bringing together 250 scientists.
But in other large collaborative projects, like take the American Brain Project, with also massive investments, if you talk with the leaders of that project, they would say, look, if we just manage to train a next generation of researchers who can be more multidisciplinary and collaborative, the project was a success. But in your description, the outcome is on a 2-year time frame, right? So do you see these as comparable objectives? Would that also be a sufficient justification to keep everyone on board in the project that you have set up?
Yes, you know that in the Brain Project there were many tensions, but it's larger. But these tensions were there until now. ICMS, which is much smaller, doesn't have these tensions. It could appear, it can appear, but not now. Yes, it's a combination of these what you term idealistic aspects to work together, idealistic aspects to solve large societal challenges, and especially the view that you have together more possibilities to do that than as a group at its own.
Right.
So I'm absolutely not pessimistic, but I see how complex it is to create such a new and larger community between cities.
Mm-hmm. Right. But now looking
with different traditions
at the ICMS experiment that you're stepping out of today, looking back, do you feel like I made a few mistakes? There's some things I could have done better.
Yeah. And it's again a question of top down and bottom up. I think I learned from the Royal Academy, but if I would repeat a process, I would from in the very start bring more people together as I did. Now I focused on the senior leaders, on the department heads, on the professors, on the associate professors. But under that umbrella, there is a group of hundreds of junior scientists, assistant professors, and who are actually are also the force to drive these experiments to a good end. And if I would start again, I would take more time to involve a larger group of especially junior scientists to come aboard.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because as you described it earlier, it's a multi-year process, right? So the ones who are junior at year 1 are already more advanced at year 3, 4, right? And they also carry of the idea. But now, so to sort of go towards the finish line, stepping back a little bit from the concrete processes you were in on collaboration, do you feel we learned anything from the last 1.5 years of COVID-19 ruling our reality?
How many hours we have?
Context of collaboration, right?
Yeah. Let's make it a simple answer. What COVID learned us is that that in to solve these sorts of problems, you have to cooperate. That's normally it takes years to create a medicine, and now it took 1.5 years. Here also it is trust and the willingness to share, and the societal pressure, of course. And what I think is important, COVID learned also that if there are large societal problems, you actually need science to solve them. Politics alone is air, and without content, you cannot solve these problems. So, and I think that it has learned us that we actually need science to solve major problems in society. Social sciences to manage all those complot theories and social and social insecure thoughts, and biological science, to develop the medicines we need to cope with this right. New disease.
Andreas? You mentioned at an early stage that the collaborative environment was very important. I wonder whether your kind of final point about the need not just to talk to the principal investigators and heads of institutes, but also to talk to the more junior researchers. Is that also part of creating this collaborative environment? Could you tell a little bit more about if you were to start from scratch in designing a collaborative environment that's not just about principal investigators optimizing their own needs? What would you be doing then? It seems to be critical in this collaborative environment, isn't it?
Yeah, Andreas, one of the points which played a major role is COVID prevented the organization of real meetings between people in physical form. So it was not possible to organize a symposium with 200 people or 300 people, and on screen that's not possible. So if there were not, if COVID was not there, probably we could reach junior scientists more easily than now. You can reach them in one institute, but you cannot reach 300 or 400 PhD students. I'm sure that if there was no COVID, we would have organized 1, 2, 3, 4 symposia with speakers, with junior speakers, with senior speakers, with an interesting international speakers, creating junior groups, having dinners, and all that which is needed to build up such a social scientific community was not possible, and we met each other in boxes on the screen, and so that is also part of the answer. What would you do different? But some things were not possible to do different.
Right. So, but Theo, then do you believe humans, in a general sense, right, will ever be able to really and truly collaborate? Or do you think that also from a psychological, biological perspective, there are just intrinsic limitations in the human condition that will prevent us from really fully developing the potential of large-scale collaboration?
Look, evolution has learned us that cooperation is one of the core characteristics of Homo sapiens. It's a group animal. It has. If you look at Homo sapiens, you see an angel and a devil, and in between is everything. So I think cooperation is one of the social needs which is characteristic for Homo sapiens, as well as physical contact and sharing thoughts by means in social gatherings. So I think it will be possible, and it has shown that it is possible in all large scientific cooperations.
So, but then if you could change one thing in humans, what would it be?
If I repeat that question, because part of the question, I thought you answer, if you would change one part of human being, what would that be?
One thing in humans. Let's say I give you the ultimate technology. You can change any piece of the human phenotype, the Homo sapiens phenotype that you want. Which bit would you change in order to more fluently create constructive collaboration among humans?
I would lower I would lower the level of jealousy.
Okay. Very good. Well, Theo Mulder, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you too.
Hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Instrument Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.